And next we have Robin, who's going to go over the final financial report for year ending June 30th, 2018.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Tonight I will be presenting you with the financial report for fiscal year ended 17-18. First, I'll review the results of the general fund and then the water and wastewater enterprise funds. Those are the major operating funds of the city. This is a summary of the general fund budget versus actual in millions of dollars at the highest level, including the beginning fund balance as of July 1st, 2017. Total revenues, total expenditures, and fund balance remaining at the end of the fiscal year. The original budget for fiscal year 17-18, the expenses were $41.3 million. To that, we added a total of just over $3 million. The breakdown of that was a little over $1 million for grant-funded appropriations. Prior year purchase order carryovers, $555,000. Employee salary and benefit adjustments, $515,000. Strike team overtime, $418,000, which adds to revenues as well as expenditures. Purchasing fire SCBAs, $367,500. We had applied for a grant that we were trying to get, but we weren't successful, so we needed to replace those. Personnel attorneys, $60,000. City clerk election costs, $52,000, and general other items, $21,000. Totaling a final adopted budget of $44,353,867. Actual expenditures ended the year at $40,865,000, under budget by just about $3.5 million. This savings included $462,000 in purchase orders that'll carry over to fiscal year 17-18, and grants that will also carry over, leaving a remaining balance of actual savings of about $2.5 million. The savings was mostly in salaries and benefits due to vacant positions. Total personnel savings equal $2.7 million, the highest we've seen in recent years. I'll get into a little more details on that later. Material supplies and services were $275,000, and capital acquisition items were $16,000. Savings occurred across all departments and most line items of the budget. I will show you a breakdown of the savings by department in a later slide. We ended the fiscal year with an uncommitted fund balance, which meets City Council's stated policy of a 15% reserve of the 18-19 appropriations. My next several slides will focus on revenues, and then I will transition to expenditures. This shows you 10 years of actual history based upon the actual results and revenues of the city. All of the data here is audited information with the exception of 17-18. The auditors were here though. They left last Friday. They were here for 2 weeks. I'm not aware of any adjustments. There was one adjustment I located for $69.50. So other than that, I'm not expecting any material changes to what I'm presenting to you here tonight. If there is something that we didn't catch, I will let you know when I bring back the comprehensive annual financial report in December. This graph shows the city's gross sales tax revenues for fiscal year 08-09 through 17-18. It shows that revenues declined significantly during the recession, but began recovering in 10-11. 15-16 included the one-time revenues due to the state's elimination of the triple flip. I always like to point that out because it looks odd that that was such a high year. Sales tax continues to be the city's #1 general fund revenue source. At the end of this fiscal year, it comprises 31% of our total general fund revenues. That's how significant it is to support our operations. This is a summary of the city's sales tax on a cash basis. I like to show everyone this because it's the cash coming in the door that we have available to pay vendors and employees with. The fourth quarter of 17-18 shows a decline of 10%. That's related to the state of California updating their computer software. The California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, CDTFA, took over Board of Equalization, and they're upgrading their software. There was a lot of problems where taxpayers couldn't get onto the system. They couldn't download their tax returns. If they were fortunate enough to download their tax returns, sometimes they were in the middle of reporting what their revenues were, and the system kicked them off. Some of them made partial payments, some of them didn't have payments at all. It was just quite a problem, and being at the end of the fiscal year is very problematic for us because it makes it really difficult. Our revenues potentially could be down in 17-18 and then up in 18-19. The state has indicated that they're going to true up the revenues sometime during 18-19. Doesn't give me a lot of comfort sometime during 18 and 19. I would rather have a date specific, but our sales tax consultant, HDL, was able to estimate the lost revenues for us. So we went ahead and accrued those back as part of this fiscal year's revenues. And what I'm estimating is that we've missed out on potentially about less than $200,000 not included in our year-end numbers based upon the errors that CDTFA had. This shows the comparison between the cash basis and the adjusted basis, and I would like to draw your attention down to the fourth quarter 17-18. HDL's estimate was that we were up 0.1% on an adjusted basis. There's no way really of verifying that when the data is not available yet, but they compared our prior year revenues for the same businesses that had zeros, for example, and there was quite a few of those. So we were able to estimate it. In reality, it's pretty unknown at this time, and I don't like that it's at the end of a fiscal year. It would be better if it were kind of in the middle of the fiscal year so we could take care of it and get it cleaned up, but it's completely beyond our control. So I wanted to make council aware of that, that there are some reporting issues. It's not just us, it's throughout the state in its entirety. CDTFA did make a supplemental payment to everybody because they knew they had underpaid folks, but that still was less than what we would have expected it to be. This is a summary of the city's property tax revenues. Fiscal year 17-18 represents an all-time peak for property taxes. The previous high was $12.153 million in 07-08. We have now exceeded that. I know this is very, very small print. I'm wanting you to look more at the trend line at the bottom, showing that we are now back up to where we once almost were. We're back up to the 2004 highs. Not quite where we once were in 07-08 when you look at the individual home sales prices, but we're definitely recovering. We still have some that are in Prop 8 reassessed values. I expect that a good portion of those will come out with the next year's assessment. This is the city's franchise fees. The trend shows a smaller decline during the recession and steady increases since fiscal year 11-12. Recreation program revenues, they've been on the decline ever since 08-09 when the gap opened. That was a record year. I will say that I looked at expenditures for recreation programs and they are down as well. If the program doesn't go, there's less revenue, but there's also an offsetting savings in that the expenditure funds are not spent either. The city's building permit revenue shows throughout the recession it was very low. It returned to a higher level, fairly stable for 3 fiscal years, then a large increase in 16-17, followed by slightly less in 17-18. Business license revenues. This is the city's revenue collected for the business licenses. They were relatively flat with growth occurring every year since fiscal year 10-11. I looked to see how much we had generated based upon the audit that the consultant is doing for the city, and it hasn't been a huge moneymaker for us. It was about $25,000 so far year to date for the calendar year 2018. So not huge. That tells me that there wasn't a lot out there as far as unlicensed businesses. Hotel motel surcharge, again the decline with the lowest year being in 9-10, with recovery in recent years and significant growth in the past 2 years. CSAG, the fire district area that the city provides services to, increases throughout up to the current year with an all-time high again in 17-18. Total general fund revenues showing a decline through fiscal year 10-11, and when they essentially remained flat for 3 years, and then an increase of 2.28 million in 14-15, another 1.7 in 15-16, 1.65 million increase in 16-17, and then just under 2.5 million in 17-18 as far as year-over-year changes. Total revenues were 43,038,000. This represents an all-time high for Yuba City's general fund. Next, I'm going to discuss expenditures. This shows you the citywide salaries and benefits. You can see the trend during the furlough program. There was significant savings due to furloughs. You can see it went up after we transitioned out of furloughs. I looked at the vacancy savings because it's significant. As an example, in June 2017, the amount budgeted citywide for positions which were vacant totaled just over 5.2 million, and the general fund share was about 4.2 million. In March of 2018, the number of vacancies had declined significantly, of about 30 positions, with a budgeted total of just under 3.4 million and a general fund share of 2.3 million. That trend continued. Staff just gave me an update recently, and it's slightly lower than that even as of October. So what that tells me is that looking into the future for 18-19, if that trend continues and we don't have people retiring or leaving the organization, we won't see anywhere near the salary savings that we have for this fiscal year. This is just the salaries component for the city. You can see that this graph kind of follows the same trend line as the previous for salaries and benefits. The next one shows a different trend. Employee benefits just keep going up and up, and it shows that our dollars are going more towards employee benefits than they are salaries. This is how much the city's retirement is costing on a citywide basis, or excuse me, this is just the general fund. No, I'm sorry, it does say citywide at the top. It is citywide, not general fund. I wanted to look at the citywide total that we're paying for retirement. You can see if you look at 16-17, it goes down slightly for 17-18. It should have gone down a whole lot more than that because we paid off the pension obligation bonds in 16-17. That was 1.2 million. The decline is actually only about 400,000, and that's because our actual pension cost to CalPERS went up that much. I wanted to show you what it looks like without the POB payments in there, just what we're paying to CalPERS, and that's what this looks like. It's much more telling. You can see the significant increases that we're paying to CalPERS now. General fund expenditures, the yellow portion on this slide represents the amount that was budgeted and not spent. 91.6% of general fund salaries and budgets were spent. For materials, supplies, and services, I'm looking for that percentage. Guess I didn't include it. I apologize. Oh, there it is. 96.8% of materials, supplies, and services were expended, and overall 92.1% of the general fund budget amount was expended. This is a summary of total general fund expenditures for the last 10 years, showing that they too were at an all-time high at $40,865,000 at fiscal year end. This slide represents the departmental savings, or the amount unspent for each and every department at the end of the fiscal year. Just under 3.5 million on a citywide basis. And this, I know, is very, very busy, but it shows you revenues and expenditures side by side, with the purple bar being the revenues and the yellow being the expenditures. The surplus in 13-14 started out at 645,000. It grew the following year to 1.8 million, then 1.71 million, 1.75 million in 15-16, 1.62 million in 16-17, and 2.17 in 17-18. Moving on to water and wastewater. This is a summary of the water fund's budget versus actual at the highest level, showing the operating revenues, grant revenues, capital, and surcharge revenues. Expenditures for operating programs, capital equipment, CIP contributions, and debt service. The biggest things that I want to point out there is that operating revenues came in 10.4% more than budgeted for the water fund. Water sales were $949,600 more than budgeted. That was attributable mostly to the fact that consumption was 7.7% higher than in the previous year. Billing penalties were $66,000 higher, investment income $62,000 higher. Other revenues were $309,000 higher, and that one's a little bit, it's not money that we can actually use to spend to pay for expenses. That's for developer contributions, contributing infrastructure as part of subdivision improvements. Capital connection fee revenues were $148,000 higher, and capital-related investment was $21,700 more than budget projections. Operating expenditures ended the year $1.4 million less than budgeted, or about 14.3% under budget. The categories where savings occurred there: $403,000 in salaries and benefits, $157,000 in professional services, $257,000 special equipment, $51,000 buildings and facilities, $98,000 in chemicals, and $406,000 in water purchases. This is our water debt coverage ratio. I show this to you twice a year, at year end and at budget usually, showing that the historic debt coverage ratio, when you take revenues minus operating expenditures, get the net, and divide the debt service to calculate a ratio. We have to keep that at least 1.2% per our bond covenants. You can see that we were down to 1.61 in 16-17. And since then, we've bounced back to 2.5%, and we're budgeted for 2.27 for 17-18. The wastewater utility is set up similarly and reported to you similar to how the water fund was. Operating revenues ended the year about 9.6% higher than budgeted. Septic charges were $98,500 higher than budgeted. Actual sewer billing revenue $714,000 more. Expenditure items that were less than budgeted generated savings of about $613,000 in total. The majority of that was in salaries and benefits, $440,000. Heat and power, professional services, etc. 94% of the amount budgeted for wastewater was expended during the year. And the wastewater debt coverage ratios are typically healthier than they are for the water fund. This shows you the historical, and again, the same ratio applies, that we must maintain 1.2%. Now you can see what these ratios are here, with the 17-18 being 2.72 and the budgeted 18-19 2.71. With that, I'll answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you, Robin. Council have any questions or any discussion for Robin? Nope. Okay. Thank you, Robin. So this was for note and file for just our report. Thank you.
Thank you.